Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, after a day of bloodshed in which at least 35 people were killed by security forces, Sudan's opposition rejects the military's offer of elections in just 9 months, fearing that the short transition period is a setup to seize power. Also, as the number of Ebola cases in eastern DR Congo tops 2,000, medics continue to struggle to contain the disease's spread because of the remoteness and instability of the affected areas. Human rights campaigners in Nigeria push for the end to a practice which sees young girls sold off to clear their families' debts. Activists say money marriages aren't worth it and amount to slavery. But first, Sudanese protest leaders are preparing for a campaign of civil disobedience to try to force ruling generals from power. On Monday, at least 35 people were killed in a crackdown on demonstrators by security forces. The Transitional Military Council then cancelled agreements over a roadmap to civilian rule. A plan to hold elections within 9 months has been rejected by the opposition alliance. They fear that's not enough time to organise fair and transparent polls and believe that the TMC is using the offer as a tactic to get protesters to give up some of their demands. Well, Asma Ismail is one of the protesters. She joins us now from Khartoum. Asma, thanks for speaking to us. Now, first of all, the internet's been cut for a while now in Khartoum, but do you have any more clarity on the scale of what happened on Monday? We're hearing that 35 people were killed.
Thank you. Well, yes, there are reports today about bodies that have been found across the city. There are no confirmed numbers. The number of missing people is still very high. Some of them have been found, but some of them have not been found yet. There are also reports of bodies that have been thrown to the Nile. As you mentioned, with the blackout of the internet, confirmations are very difficult, particularly with the difficult movement across Khartoum at the same time. But expectations that number of injuries are high in hospitals, that the death toll is definitely higher than this figure.
On the political front, the offer for 9 months to elections were rejected. Why are protesters so sceptical about early elections?
Well, one, because what the TMC, what the Transitional Military Council have showed over the last couple of weeks and specifically today is the same faith and the same tactics that the previous regime has been doing in terms of terrorizing people in the streets, shooting off live ammunition. There is no trust that the TMC is actually, by the steps that have been announced through elections and so forth, actually plans to hand over power to a civilian rule. One, this step is legitimizing the rule of the TMC by declaring a caretaker government. This is giving legitimacy to the TMC to form such a government and to oversee the elections. This is really a fake transformation, and it's not really a genuine way forward. There are serious issues if we are to move to an election. Issues of war, issues of transformation, peace, solving the issues of war in Darfur and in the two areas, and really preparing the ground for civic and political life that will ensure such an election will be free and fair and will really lead to the transformation that protesters were calling for in the streets in the last 6 months.
So what are protesters' plans? What are you willing to do to safeguard your hopes for a power transfer to a civilian authority?
So people up to the last minute, despite the skepticism of a lot of us, the political leadership were actually in negotiations with the TMC, even despite the desire of some of the protesters. But that was the way of finding a political solution that will save the country from bloodshed. After what happened today, there's only one way for the protesters and for the political leadership, which is really to escalate, to continue the civil disobedience, and to really put pressure on the Transitional Military Council inside the country and from outside to really hand over power to civilian government and to back from the election proposal.
And Asma, is a lot of the focus has been on Khartoum. Has the challenge to the security forces been reflected elsewhere in the country?
Yes. So one is what happened yesterday did not only happen in Khartoum. This has happened at the same time with the same setup across the country in other areas. Up until yesterday evening, some of the areas like Sinnar and other areas where the security forces managed to disperse the protesters, people have managed to organize quickly and to take off and to really move out the security forces outside of the sit-in areas. In some other areas, people were dispersed, but violence has been heavily used also in Gadarif, in Port Sudan, and in Al-Nahud.
Thanks very much, Asma Israel, there for us in Khartoum. In DR Congo, rebels have killed at least 13 people in a raid near the eastern city of Beni. Locals have blamed the attack on militants from the ADF group, who they believe struck in revenge for a crackdown by the Congolese army last week, in which 26 members of its militia were killed. Now, attacks by various rebel groups operating in the area have made it harder to contain an outbreak of Ebola. It's the first time the disease has struck in a conflict zone. This week, the number of cases in eastern DR Congo topped 2,000. Over 1,300 people have died since last August.
The bad news came from the headquarters of the World Health Organization in Geneva. There have now been more than 2,000 Ebola cases reported in eastern Congo. Rebel attacks and community resistance have hurt containment efforts, according to the WHO.
Every time there is a security incident, we are not able to provide services and go into community. We are not able to vaccinate. We are not able to treat those who are ill. We are not able to follow up on those who may have been exposed to the virus.
Here in Butembo, a Cameroonian doctor was killed last month by militiamen. Security has now been boosted.
The rebels can attack hospitals or set fire to them. So we have put in 2 fences around the building now. And there are police officers around the hospital. So now the community is less afraid of coming here.
The number of confirmed cases reached the 2,000 milestone 3 times as quickly as it took to reach 1,000. The outbreak was declared in August. It's the second deadliest in history. So far, it has killed more than 1,300 people. The WHO did mention some signs of progress. It said more than 129,000 people have received an experimental but effective Ebola vaccine in its first widespread use.
Now, South Africa's economy shrunk by about twice as much as expected in the first quarter of 2019. The 3.2% contraction comes as a shock, as a decline of around 1.7% had been predicted. The news has hit investor confidence as the rand was about 1.8% weaker against the dollar by Tuesday afternoon. It's also bad news for President Cyril Ramaphosa's plans to overhaul the economy. Now, despite a ban on the practice, families in southern Nigeria are still selling off young girls to older men in a bid to clear debts. The girls' lives often follow a depressingly predictable pattern. Kept out of education, many end up pregnant at a young age in circumstances campaigners say amount to slavery. France 24's Anna Cunningham tells us more.
The Beshev community has a long-standing tradition. Dorothy was married off to clear a family debt when she was about 7. Now, at 25, she's expecting her 6th child. She recalls how adults pinned her down so her new husband could sleep with her.
If not with God, this thing will be happening.
If it wasn't for God, I would have killed myself. That someone pinned me down so he could sleep with me. I can't forget that. But because of God, I try to forget. But I used to think, what kind of marriage is this?
Now who can marry? Well, don't marry.
Few acknowledge what happened to Dorothy as child rape. But increasingly, the women here are recognising this practice, albeit outlawed, is unacceptable. Many have sought support through their church. Tradition is a deep part of society here. Making money marriage, this way of using young girls as currency, a difficult subject to talk openly about.
In
Here in Bichiva, generally people have no respect for women. But I live here. They know me. They have seen me. They know what kind of a person I am. You know, they're very spiritual, so they trust me, and I can speak for them.
To voice out.
Dorothy worries if something happens to her, then her daughters too could be sold off. Her husband, the same man who married her aged 7, has promised he will look after them. His views on their marriage have changed.
What I did does bother me. I should never have done it, you understand? If you brought me a young girl to marry now, a money woman, I would not do it.
Nigeria has signed laws to protect children, but putting an end to this tradition of child marriage for money to pay off debts is harder to break.
And Tuesday saw millions of Muslims across the continent begin the celebration of the end of Ramadan and the start of Eid al-Fitr. So we'll leave you with images of the festival in Somalia. That's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Hello, I'm Annette Young, the host of 51%. This June, France is hosting the Women's World Cup. That's right, the biggest event in women's football. An estimated 1 billion people will be watching. So we'll be taking a look at how it's far from being an equal playing field when you compare women's football to men's.
The 51%, presented by Annette Young on France 24 and France24.com.